All right, hey, hi guys, how's it going? So this is the Randy Haines interview part two, and if you're just coming first time around, you can learn a lot from any of these interviews. So this is we got May 20th, just before summer here, 2023. So glad glad to have everyone in the YouTube video joining us, and here's Randy Haines. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Hey, definitely well ensconced into summertime over here in Eastern Washington in the United States. It is quite hot up in the mid upper 80s already, and we'll be getting hotter. So I know some people are just getting into summer, but we are well ensconced into it at this point. How are things going over where you're at? It's good to see you again, by the way.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah. It's like the fire of spring here. So
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, you got any questions for me? I would love to answer them.
yeah. So first of all, I wanted to talk about composing because I know you do Sibelius, and because I think it's such a cool tool. And like for myself, how I started composing, I didn't use any of these newer DAWs that they have, like Logic or FL Studio or Reason or anything like that to compose. I used sheet music. I used Sibelius, and I was like trained as a musician and all that good stuff. So, but now it's not required to have any of that stuff to be able to make like awesome music. And
True.
like I don't know if it's a problem. I mean, sometimes it is. I feel like, but uh, you know, music is awesome, and everyone wants to get their hands on it. So whatever makes good sounds works. But so how did you like kind of start writing music? Because you've been around, YouTube and everything for a while as well. So
Yeah. So I released my first album in 2004. That was a much more traditionally created piece of work. It's called Confusion. I'm very happy with that to this day. I think that I should say we, Dave Walker, Braden McGraw, Jerry Rome, Chris. Oh, I forget Chris's last name. He did bagpipes. And I had a couple of drummers, and Dave Walker was a producer engineer. So we worked on that together. And that one, I was kind of coming of age as a musician during that time. And so I would write a riff here on the guitar, write a riff there, and like when I was traveling in the military. So, that album was written in Korea, in California, in Washington, in Massachusetts, in Germany, because I was all over the place in the military and taking a guitar with me. And so, that was kind of my coming of age story. And I didn't know if I would ever do another album after that, another solo album. I've worked with a few different groups and worked on recordings and things with them, and then I've been a guest musician on a few things. And then the way this came about was kind of odd, in my opinion. I had back around probably 2016, 2017, I was asked to start playing in a local coffee shop once every other week. And I would just take an acoustic guitar, sit in a corner, and just kind of play some improvisational light stuff, just the one instrument, and people would, kind of mostly not pay attention to me, which is expected in a coffee shop. But it was fun. I was getting paid for it. It was great. So then I gotta give credit to a close friend of mine, John Stevenson, just a great guy. So he and his mom would both come in and watch me play guitar. And one day he says, "Randy, I dare you to sing a Taylor Swift song in one of your shows." I said, "Okay." And the thing about me, so I'm not the kind of person who will just take any dare. I don't do that. But if I take a dare, I already know that I can do whatever I've been dared to do. I know that I can accomplish it. So I started setting this up, and I said, well, I wanted to, kind of do my own version of Taylor Swift. So I wasn't just going to do it on an acoustic guitar. And I'm also going to say here, I really like Taylor Swift. I would never do a parody of a song from someone that I didn't actually like their music. If I didn't like them as a musician, I would not do it. So I kind of set up this hard rock heavy metal version of this. And for that, I needed to bring my computer system in to amplify all of this kind of stuff. And I promise this ties into your question. So I realized, I'm going to have this song that's completely different than everything else I would normally do. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make an hour's worth of backing tracks. And I'm like, so basically I've got 2 weeks to write an hour's worth of music. How am I going to do that? And I don't, challenges don't bother me at all. I enjoy picking up a challenge. So what I realized at this point, we can go more into depth on this later if you want, was that if I write the drums first and use that as a foundation, then it's easier for me to write everything else. So the first thing I did was all the dishes, because for me, if my house is not clean, creativity doesn't work well.
I feel you, man. I've been cleaning all day.
That's gotta happen. So I cleaned the house, and then I sat down and I laid out an hour's worth of drums. And at this point, I wasn't using Sibelius. I actually did this in the piano roll. People might be familiar with the piano rolls. Basically, a place where you can open this up in a recording program and just say, I want a note to happen here. And they're great. So I wrote, this hour's worth of music there. And so then I wrote the drums, and then I wrote in a bass guitar line. And then I wrote in some real simple like pads, synth pads and stuff. So pretty basic, nothing crazy going on at that point. And if I were to go back and look at that now, I think I might still have it in my computer somewhere. It would be very rudimentary compared to what I'm doing, but I accomplished it. So I go in, I basically just improvised guitar solos over those backing tracks I had created. And a whole bunch of people showed up for it, because I told a bunch of people, hey, I'm going to sing Taylor Swift. And I sang Taylor Swift very poorly, and it was fun. I had a great time doing it. So that event, that dare from my friend John, that pushed me into this new direction. And I'm like, okay, I now have this new kind of level of creativity where I can do this kind of rapid fire music. And so I created multiple albums worth of music by doing that. And then I realized, and I already had Sibelius I had used for a couple of small projects for some, some scoring, some web series and stuff.
I feel like for guitar players, like having a backing track as a drummer is like essential.
It's fantastic. I love it.
Like, you can just riff. You can just
exactly
riff and like you don't need a backing harmony to make stuff up, which is
correct.
Makes more
right? If you know how to improvise on guitar, backing tracks and just play lead guitar, and you can make up rhythm guitars as long as you know how to use that key. So that's exactly what I did. So after I did this several times, I started to realize that if I were to refine this process, that I could easily put out an album once a week. And so that I started moving it into Sibelius and realizing that, when I lay everything out in sheet music format, it's easier for me to keep track of everything. It's much easier for me to be organized. I could put in notes about, okay, here's section A, here's where I'm going to repeat section A, here's section B, here's a break, and here's my intro. And so I could put these notes in, and it really streamlined the process, made it really nice. And I basically followed that same process for a while, that I would write all the drums. And to this day, I still do this. When I'm writing an album, I will write an entire album's worth of drums first. And the reason for this would be a slight digression, but the reason I do this, if we were to go off on a little thought experiment about what were the earliest instruments, what was the first instrument? We don't know. It wasn't documented, but they weren't sitting here doing documentaries about the early musicians, because we didn't have video cameras and writing and stuff like that yet. So this is all a thought experiment, but it was probably voice. And there's a very good argument to be made that it's possible that we actually had percussion before we started singing. Clapping of hands, stomping of feet, stomping on our, smacking our chests, smacking the side of the tent or the hut or whatever. And it's also very likely that percussion and vocals arose simultaneously. I think that's probably the strongest argument, in my opinion. Those probably happened at the same time. And that,
and then Oedipus or whatever his name was, Orpheus, like playing
yeah,
the lute, and then his
yeah.
wife died, and he was really sad, and he went around the world like playing.
The early minstrels, absolutely. But I think that concept of voice and percussion are absolutely pervasive in every type of music that we've ever seen and heard. So the percussion is laying down the foundation of this. A way I describe this to my students is, you've driven around and you've seen houses being built. One thing I can pretty much guarantee you've never seen is a house being built from the roof down and the foundation being poured last. I don't do construction. Maybe you could build a house like this, but I'm inclined to think that it's not a good idea.
Some
it's
people
better to build it from
melodies first. But
build the foundation. And so that's what I do with my music is that is the foundation of the music. Everything sits on atop that. And then in the early stages, I would always write the complete bass next and then write the guitar based off of the bass guitar. And of course, this is all in sheet music at this point, so I could listen back. And that's a great thing about modern sheet music programs is you can actually listen back to the program and hear what you're doing. Like, oh, okay, it doesn't sound like it's going to sound when it's recorded, but I can get a sense of where I'm going with this. And I love that. So over time, of course, this morphed, and I became more robust with my capacities with the sheet music program. Sibelius, as you mentioned, I have used a few others: Guitar Pro, Tux Guitar, MuseScore. And as I did this, I just continued to basically evolve this process. And I spent about a year and a half on my second album, which I believe the release date was August 3rd, 2018. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to check. I spent about a year and a half on that. And really that year and a half, more than working on that album, was refining my process for creating an album like that.
Yeah.
And at this point, I think I had written like 6 albums or so. And so I kind of had some stuff ready to go. And I got to, okay, I understand my own process. I know how I do synths. I know how I put in piano parts. I know how I put in string sections. So I can start releasing music. And I told a few people, I'm gonna do an experiment and try to release an album once a week. And, kind of got I think you're gonna fail, Randy. I think you're crazy. But then I went, say again?
That's all you need is 6 songs minimum, technically, right?
Well, I had 6 albums worth. So on each of my albums, the shortest album I've done is 44 minutes, 22 seconds. That's my 63rd album. So my average album is around 52 to 55 minutes. So they are full-length albums, So
one time I was writing an album and I was like, I wonder what's the minimum I can do, And I looked it up.
And that's a great question to ask. And one of the most popular albums of all time, Dark Side of the Moon, is under 40 minutes. Dark Side of the Moon, it's a short album, but it's great. If I can write an album on the level of Dark Side of the Moon, life is complete. It's a brilliant piece of music. So it doesn't have to be long, and that's absolutely valid. So I had these people kind of giving me I don't think it's going to work, and then I went and proved them wrong by doing an album a week for 11 months. And in that 11 months, I put out 49 albums. So I actually missed twice on the weekly thing. I don't remember exactly which albums they were, but there was one. I'd been doing it for 5 or 6 months, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a week off. I'm just going to give myself a little break, because it's a lot of work. It's not something that happens easily. And then there was one other album. That's okay. There was one other album I recorded, and it was ready to go out. And I listened to it and I'm like, I did a bad job on this. I'm not willing to put this out. And so I recorded a short video of me saying exactly that, because I had, people kind of like, is he going to do another album this week? I said, hey, I did the album and it sucked. And like I said, I played poorly. And my mother was talking about, she's like, we probably wouldn't have noticed that. And I said, the thing is, on this one, you would have. I'm willing to put out an album with mistakes in it. And you're right, most people won't notice, but this one was bad. So I only missed twice. So that took me up to my 50th album there after 11 months. And then I went ahead and took a little break after my 50th album and slowed down a bit.
Music just like you have maybe, because for me, like I always write music and then I'll maybe look back at it and say it's not finished or whatever, and then you have to go back to it at least once to like finish it. But that process of going back to the song is like an animal to.
This is an interesting thing that happened while I was doing this rapid fire era of my life, or rapid fire sessions, that I started to get a really good sense. I would record, typically in the recording process, basically I would export MIDIs out of Sibelius, put them into Reaper, process the things I wasn't going to play, pianos, drums and stuff. And then I would play the instruments I'm going to play. And, when I was doing the guitar solos, which were almost entirely improvisational, I just kind of got to where I would know if I was going to be happy with it. And so a lot of times I wouldn't hear my own album until 2 or 3 weeks after I put it out. And so what would happen is I was releasing my albums on Friday at noon.
Wait. What happened with the other album that you didn't like is you listened to it?
I recognized while doing the recordings that I needed to check it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I was like, this one I'm going to have to listen to and see what I want to do.
Confidence that you didn't have to listen back to your albums to know they were
correct. And so at that time, we actually lived on this really great place. We lived over in Western Washington, and we were living on a 1 acre plot. It was almost all grass. And I would go out and mow that with an old push style like grandpa mower that doesn't have a motor on it. And it would take about an hour and a half to mow the lawn. And that was kind of my main exercise through the grassy periods. And so I would listen to my albums while doing that. But sometimes I wouldn't get to a new album until, like I said, 2 or 3 weeks after I put it out. And so it was a really interesting part of my process and my evolution, that I would be listening to an album that I've put out 2 more albums since this, right? And I would listen to it, I'd be like, oh gosh, that hi-hat sounds a little too loud. I'll have to check that on my next album. And this made me realize just how good this process was for me as a musician, because I've had projects where you're in the studio for 2 years, 5 years on an album, right? You're working for months and months or even over a year on just one song. And when you put in 6 years, 3 years in the studio, you don't want to hear any mistakes after you've put the album out, right? So you listen to your album after you put it on CD and you spent 6 years and all this money, and you're like, oh my God, the hi-hat's still too loud. It kind of breaks your heart a little bit. But when you spent 5 days on something, and then it feels like an old album because you've put out 2 more albums, you're like, oh, hi-hat's too loud, I'll check that on my next album. You don't really hear as much.
I feel like what you're saying right now, like a lot of people could relate to, because like the processes that we have now are like a lot easier to like analyze your own music, or not even have to. You just keep going and making new stuff, or like playing around with what you can do with all the technology you have, and then those processes
huge. It's so much you can do. You're right. And there's another interesting story that really helped lead me to say I can do an album a week. And a lot of times, we hear about quality over quantity. Write a great song instead of a lot of.
No,
I am
true.
a firm believer in quantity over quality.
Yeah.
And the story that led me to this, I love this story. Say again?
Because you get better by doing a lot of stuff. It's that
Yes.
simple.
It is.
And then,
You're right. It is that simple. And so the thing that led me to this is a story I read about a pottery class. And in this pottery class, they started their session, I don't know, quarter or semester or whatever it was. I don't even know if it was college. I don't know where this class was. But the the teacher got up in front of the class and said, I'm going to grade you differently than I ever have before this year. And he said, on this half of the class, you're going to be graded on quality. You're going to make one piece of pottery. And at the end of the session, we're going to grade you on how well you did. On this half of the class, you're going to be graded on quantity. We're going to weigh how much pottery you did, and the most pottery gets the highest grade. And then the experiment, and you can probably see where this is going, the experiment was at the end of the year, they graded everyone on quality. And all of the highest quality pieces came out of the quantity side of the class. Because if you make 50 pieces of pottery, like you just said, you're going to get better at making pottery if you make 50 pieces rather than making one. Because you make a bowl and you're like, gosh, I'm not quite sure what I did on the lip of that. Let me try that again. And then you make a mug and maybe you didn't put the handle on quite right. So let me try the handle a different way. And so you get better at it. And this is something that I very much bring over into my teaching. And sometimes it can be a struggle because this is almost diametrically opposed to what we actually see in public education, which is in public education, there's a question to which there is an answer, which you are supposed to get right. It's all about quality. So I tell my students, they're struggling writing a killer riff. A lot of my students are rock and metal students. I want to write some killer riffs, but all my riffs suck. I'm like, okay, play one for me. Oh, I don't remember any. Why not? Well, I've been working on this one. I'm like, I want you to write a riff a day and be able to play all 7 riffs for me next week. And I'm just getting, and then after that, once they accomplish that, I'm like, now I want you to write 10 riffs a day so you can play 70 riffs. And you're going to write a good riff in there somewhere. So
another side of this dice is that if you focus on trying to learn music, that's really difficult. And I remember actually last week you were talking about this on your show. I stopped by.
Well, thank you.
About how someone was trying to learn Ego Death by Polyphia and like the Steve Vai part.
Yeah.
And or just the song. Like any part would be difficult to learn, obviously, but just like learn a little piece of it, learn 4 bars or 2, even just 2 bars of it. And then and that's important for beginning musicians to learn, that you have to kind of do things in chunks at first instead of focusing on a whole song and wasting your time, because then you get more experience, and when you go to learn more songs, then you have those tools from all the other songs you've learned, whether it's hammer-ons or bends or whatever you're learning from those.
Correct.
Those little
all of it songs. Yeah. No, this is a great point. And my personal story about this, and this kind of ties into how I think about learning things in these small parts. So I had started playing guitar when I was 8 years old, and I quit when I was about 11 or 12 because I hated my guitar teacher. And to this day, I know a lot more about the guy. He was a terrible teacher. He turned a lot of people off to music. So I started playing again when I was about 17. And I picked up the sheet music, the tablature book for Master of Puppets. And I started learning the first 2 measures of the song Battery, the first song in the book, first song on the album. And I spent about 2 weeks on it. And I didn't know that this was a hard piece to play. Yeah. In my naivety, I thought, okay, Metallica, that's just heavy metal. That's easy. I'll just do that. Right.
Yeah.
And so that actually really helped. So I spent 2 weeks learning this little 2-measure thing. And then I could play it along with a cassette tape because I'm freaking old. And that's what we had back then. But I was like, I can play this. This is awesome. And then I just kind of started doing that. And so to me, the album Master of Puppets, my interpretation of that is that those guys got together and just put together a bunch of heavy metal exercises just so I could learn how to play heavy metal, which, thank you Metallica for writing a bunch of exercises for little Randy. And when you think of it like that, it's like, I'm not learning how to play Battery or Master of Puppets or Ego Death or anything else. I'm just taking this little thing here, and that's just an exercise. And if you do that enough times, you will learn the whole song. I think it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I was hired to play Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson for a wedding reception. I was hired, yeah. Well, and this was kind of cool. I was contacted by this lady, and she said, that a mutual friend had sent her my way.
Did she give you time?
Well, and this is part of the story. So she's saying, I've contacted 6 other musicians. I think it was 6 others, and they all said, no, I can't play that. And so I was wondering if you can. I said, well, I can, but when's your wedding reception going to be? Because I'm going to need time. She said, well, it's 18 months away. Okay, great. We can work with this. Right. And she knew what she was asking for.
I hope she was paying you a lot.
I did pretty well on that one. I'm not going to give amounts out in an interview, but I did pretty well for that song. And that, I already knew, a couple of the main riffs from it, but I did that exact thing. Let me learn this part. Let me learn this part. Let me learn this part. But on that one also, and this is a great thing about learning, once I knew the whole song, I used a different process. And this is something that, music teachers, for as long as they've been teaching music, have been saying to their students, slow down. Slow down, learn these parts slower. So what I did on Cliffs of Dover is I put the drums and bass into my recording program, and I've set it so it would play it 58 times in a row. And the first time it played it at 50% speed, so half speed. The second time it played it at 51% speed, then 52, all the way up to 107% speed. And 2 times the week of the show, I earned the money very well. It would take about 6.5 hours to play through like that. And I played that entire thing twice, just the week of the show. And it's really cool because, parts of that, it might be a fairly fast part, but when you go down to 50% speed, you're holding these notes and it seems like forever. So you'll start putting vibrato in different places, and you'll kind of modify your technique. And then after you get this all the way up to speed, that informs how you actually play it. And so, I took this all the way up to 107% speed. Go ahead. Sorry.
How long did that take you of that repetition?
Oh, to play through the 58 times, about 6.5 hours. Yeah. Yeah.
You just sit there and do it for 6.5 hours straight?
So I did it twice, and I did it straight through one time. And the other time I took a break only because I got a call from my parents and they had a dead battery. And I needed to go give my parents a jump start so they could get back home. So that I took a break on that one. But yeah, it was great. I mean, it's like, and like if you said play Cliffs of Dover right now, it's been 6 years. I couldn't do it. I would have to spend a few hours getting that back up to speed. But
that's such a crazy process.
It is, and the thing is here that I think
can I ask you one more question real quick?
Please, yes.
All right, so let's say you're like 79, 80% in, like 80 percent speed. And like, do you still notice the difference between the 1%, or is it kind of like meshing together at this point?
At no one step can you tell that you've gone faster than on the last step. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird when you're like, it's almost like,
yeah.
It's like, have you ever had that thing where you're driving home and then you get home and you're like, I don't remember driving home. Right? It's like you just completely blank.
No, you don't have to relate it to something, because the Hanen exercises for piano.
I do, yes.
So I've gone really deep into those with that kind of like speeding up thing. So I know how that feels. It's time to slow down, and then like
All of a sudden, you're up to the like you said, the 80%. You're like, how did they get so fast? I don't
yeah,
remember. I don't remember doing this.
yeah, yeah.
It is
That's
something
wild.
that
Yeah,
I encourage that process to everyone. Play slow. And it's funny, a few years ago I had downloaded some books that were written by guitar teachers from like I want to say like the late 1800s. And 125 years ago or more, guitar teachers were saying the exact same thing that all music teachers still say today. Practice your scales, make sure your technique is right, slow down. That's never going to go away because that's how you learn things.
yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I will. I don't know if I've cautioned you about this before, but sometimes getting me talking about music theory can be dangerous because I don't tend to shut up.
No, it's okay. It's
So what else do you want to talk about here?
no, on that point, I always tell people because all these people ask me because I always take Ubers and I tell people what I do for work and whatever, and then they always ask me like, how can they learn? And I always tell them to get a teacher, and it's that simple. And like I always
Yes.
tell them, don't learn off YouTube. Don't like. There's only a handful of people who can really learn how to play an instrument off like very specific thing that you need to be able to do is play an instrument and then learn how to navigate it and you have
And
to have
I would like to address this
yeah
because even if you're an autodidact and you're great at learning things on your own, there are things that get missed. And
yeah
one thing that I really struggle with when I see guitar content online, some of it is excellent, some of it is very bad. So if you're beginning, right, some of it is going to teach you things wrong. And if you're a
yeah
beginner, you don't know if it's good or bad instruction. You have no way of assessing that. But one of the things that a person is likely to miss, and what I teach on my first guitar lesson is I say to people, hang your hand over your guitar like this and just relax. And 100% of the time, a person's hand will go into exactly that shape. It's never not happened. This is how we relax, right? And so when you have your hand on a guitar, your thumb should be pointing up. But most people end up with their thumb over here, and that makes their playing significantly less efficient. You're not going to get that from a YouTube video. And you're also not going to have, even if you see a YouTube video that teaches you to hold your hand like that, you're not going to have someone watching you play saying, hey, remember to get your thumb up. So when I have a new student every week, it's like, hey, let's take a look at that thumb on the left hand. And, I don't expect someone, because I teach them, 6 things to do with their right hand, 6 things to do with their left hand. I don't expect them to get all that right, but that's why those reminders are good. And that's why having some sort of a mentor is good. And that's true outside of music. You want to learn to dance, you want to learn martial arts, you want to learn to make baskets, you want to learn to sew. Having someone show you how to put the string in your sewing machine properly is a really good idea. It's easy to get it wrong.
pay me to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of sewing, so this is something I actually know about. So I really, I'm very passionate about what you see on YouTube. And the other thing that the thing that bothers me the most about what I see on YouTube and other places online is there's this idea that I've got a method for you to play guitar and you don't have to learn scales. Aren't you tired of all the trouble it takes to learn scales? This is what these people want you to believe. That this is hard to do. To play one note at a time, one after the other, is somehow difficult. I would say, and if there are any aspiring budding guitar players out there, the 2 most important things you can learn on the guitar are to identify the note that you're playing on the fretboard and to play your scale patterns. 2 of the easiest things to learn on the guitar are how to identify the note you're playing on the fretboard and your scale patterns. And the 2 least likely things for people to learn on guitar are the notes of the fretboard and their scale patterns. People find it boring. But if you will be the guitarist that goes, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do the boring stuff because 9 out of 10 other people aren't doing the boring stuff, it just puts you ahead of the game right away.
Yeah, it's true.
Another way I've stated this much more simply is it's a good idea to have a very high tolerance for monotony if you want to learn to play guitar. If you're good at being bored, it's much easier to learn just about anything.
So let's see. So let's talk about your music. So with your new shows, like how's your process now with your, because I see you like on there, join live. It comes up on my feed sometimes, and I'm like,
Cool.
sometimes I go in and watch, and I especially like how you like address the audience's questions and like
Thank
chat
you.
about things. I think you're really good at communicating with people on that level. Um, so like, what's your how do you get ready for it? You go for a run? Do you mow the lawn?
Well, where we live now, our lawn is very small. It's about the size of a postage stamp or something. So that's much easier out here these days. I do run on pretty much a daily basis. I generally run about 6 miles a day, but I wouldn't call that part of my prep. The main thing for that,
Yeah.
sorry, say again?
In a way, it kind of is,
I mean, staying healthy is definitely a good idea.
You got to stand up for your shows.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes I'll grab a stool and sit down for a lighter song or maybe some slide guitar or classical guitar, but for the most part, I'm standing up. But I do have, for as far as prepping for the actual show, I've got a checklist because, as you know, you've seen the show, and I think we put a clip of the show on the last video. That it's I got a light show going in here. You can, I don't think you can see them right now. It's kind of dark behind me, but I've got these stage lights set up in here. I got a smoke machine, so the stage lights, really pop. And so, I've got to make sure my lights are on. I've got to make sure that the programs that run the lights are on. I've got my broadcast software. I've got my recording software. I don't actually memorize any of my albums. So the way I'm set up, my recording program basically connects to my sheet music program and turns the pages for me. So I got to get all that. So I've got a fairly lengthy checklist that I have to go through. And I pull up my checklist and it's like, okay, this program on, I've got all my software, go through one at a time. These are all on. I've got 4 cameras, all check off all 4 cameras. All my lights are on. This program's, and then did I tune my guitar? Do I got my sunglasses? I always wear sunglasses in my shows because I got these bright lights in my face like you're on stage. So it's like, are my sunglasses here? Do I have some water in case I get thirsty during a show? Because I will, because I'm an active little guy. So that's like the actual checklist, but there's definitely a lot of prep work prior to that. So a lot of the prep work has been, like with my composition process, it's been an evolutionary thing that, when I first started doing the shows, I just had 4 lights sitting on the floor behind me and a couple of lights up on my desk to light me from the front. And so it was pretty easy to program those because I only had 6 lights. Now I've got 30 lights. And so it takes, about 8 hours to program lights for a show because every time you see a light go on or off, that's been programmed in advance. And I actually do that in Sibelius also. I put notes in and turn those into MIDIs, turn the MIDI into a DMX signal. It's very complex. So, that kind of prep work is a big deal. And that's the most boring part of the prep work is programming the lights because there's like no reward until you're actually doing a show. Because when I program the lights, they don't turn on and off. It's just all in my imagination.
Yeah.
So programming the lights is important. Making sure that everything is going to function correctly, getting a lot of people who stream, and I don't want this to sound like a put down because there's some fantastic streamers out there. Most people are just sitting in front of a camera and a microphone, and that works, because they're on an acoustic guitar or whatever. It's much more complex getting the sound synchronized and into the broadcast software for me. So all of that has kind of been set up in advance, but I got to make sure every single thing is working and that everything's going to trigger correctly. So it's quite a bit. I would say, if I wanted to do a show right now, I would say, okay, give me a half hour, and then I'm going to have to be full on going for it to be able to set up in a half hour to do a show from where I'm at right now. Because it's in this room that I do the shows, but I would have to be just full on hitting the checklist, getting things turned on, picking out which albums I'm going to do, getting everything synced so everything's going to work. And most commonly these days I do 2 albums per show, and so I have to be able to go from album A to album B in my recording system, which also requires turning on and turning off sound. So it's fairly complex. It's fun. I like it.
So after playing these albums in this live show, like for a while, so do you find yourself like really memorizing them? I know you still have to use the sheet music, but like since you're doing the same songs over and over, you're doing the albums that you've done. Maybe you're choosing different ones, but like eventually, because I've never really done that, like played like the same stuff for like extended period of time, like all the music I've written or anything like that. So how's that process like for your memory? Like how do you find yourself remembering all the parts?
That's a great question.
It sounds like a great process for really, if you wanted to go on tour or something, you just kind of cycle through all your albums.
Well, I think if I were going to tour, which I would be unlikely, I've been asked to go on tour with a punk band a couple of times, and I've always turned it down because I don't enjoy travel. I'm just such an introvert. But if I were going to tour, probably what I would do is just pick 1 album or 2 albums, and I would memorize them, so I wouldn't have to have the sheet music in front of me. And that way, it would just be so much more efficient to play that way. But what I have found in this is, so I've got a total of 66 albums that I have released, which it's still weird to me just to say numbers like that. I've released 66 albums. That just sounds weird to me. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would you release 66 albums? I'd be like, no, no, I can't do that. So I've got 17, 18 of those albums I have set up to do shows with. And I'm cycling through about 14 of those right now because I've got a few synth issues I got to work on a couple of those albums. And so I definitely do find myself knowing certain parts. Like I know, that's the opening to one of my albums. I don't remember what that song is called, but I remember the riff. I don't even remember which album it's off of. But if the sheet music popped up, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I know where I'm going with this. So definitely certain parts of it I do have somewhat committed to memory like that. So when my 21st album, The Innocent Assassin, there's a song called 18 Iron Chains to Bind the Wicked King. And one of the things as I mentioned earlier, my guitar solos are improvisational, but what I will sometimes do what I often do is I will write a motif. And so that it might be 1 or 2 measures or 4 measures that's like, here's an idea, play this, and then use that to guide where you might go in your guitar solo. So like in 18 Iron Chains to Bind the Wicked King, now I'm gonna make a fool of myself. So that part of the guitar solo I have written in advance. And then when I get done with that, and that's on the sheet music, but I also basically know it. So I know some of these little motifs. I know some of my rhythm guitar parts. And so, yeah, some of the albums, like last night I played The Patron Saint of Murderers, my 55th album, and I played about half of City of Souls. And so those 2 albums I have played quite a lot. And so a lot of the riffs, even if I couldn't play them right now, once I see the sheet music, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this. But then even at that, it's, sometimes I'll be riffing along and I'll be like, I have no idea what's coming up on this song. And so I'll even say that, like I'll have a song pulled up. I'll be like, I don't know what this song sounds like. I can see what key it's in. I can see the tempo marker telling me how fast to go, but I don't know what this song sounds like. So let's see what happens. And I'll hit the start button and just start playing. And it's a really cool thing. So yeah, definitely some of the stuff I do remember, and then some of the other stuff I'm like, yeah, I'm just being a complete airhead today. I have no idea what's going on. So it's fun that way. It's a fun. It makes it an adventure. And I have, like I said, I've worked with other groups before where you play the same songs over and over. And I'd imagine, as many times as Leonard Skinner has played Sweet Home Alabama, they got to be bored with that song. And so, one of the nice things about what I do is that I don't get bored with it. I don't get bored at all. But there's also an interesting flip side to that, which, when I watch my friend Mandy Prater, she is an excellent streamer. I think she's exclusively on Twitch. I believe she's a Twitch partner. And she's, kind of singer-songwriter style, and she's great at it. She's got a great streaming personality, great voice. And so she does a lot of strumming and playing. She's got this song that actually had some radio play locally down in Austin, Texas, called On the Outside. And I've never seen one of her streams where she doesn't play that song. And she has a very large viewership. She's got a very large group of followers, and they want to hear that song. So that's something that you don't get with the Mad Poet is if you listen to me today and tomorrow, you're probably not going to hear the same song twice in a row. And a lot of people do like that. They want to hear their favorite song over and over again. So it's kind of an interesting bit of dichotomy about, should you have 18 different albums you're going to cycle through and try to spread them out like that? I don't know what the right answer is. I'm definitely doing it that way is going to appeal to a very different audience than would appeal to Mandy Prater. I think most of the people that watch her show would probably not be really into what I'm doing. Some of them probably would be, but a lot of them would be. It's just a very different stylistic approach to how we're doing things, and I think that's great because I don't want everyone out there just being a carbon copy of each other. I don't, with my students, I don't want them to be little Randy Jr. I want them to be the biggest version of them they can be. So I've gotten off topic here.
If someone held a gun to your head and told you to play all 14 albums, you had to do it. You'd be able to do it, right?
Do I have the sheet music?
Yes.
Yeah, piece of cake.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I'm just thinking about compared to because your process is you at home and just playing your own music. So I was just thinking about bands. They don't have 14 albums that they can just play anytime. They maybe 2 or 3, right?
True.
Maybe the newest ones they're working on, and then a handful of popular songs from maybe one of their albums over the period of 10 years. Different songs have become popular, like the Chili Peppers, like Snow, Can't Stop. They always play the same songs from way back in the day, but then they have the new stuff. But you can basically, with the sheet music at home, play pretty much.
Right.
I know stuff that you've done in the last 6 years or so.
Technically, I could in my shows. Yeah. I could do. Right. Yeah. In my shows, I could do 65 of my 66 albums. The only one I wouldn't be able to do is my very first one. Right. My very first album was recorded in a different studio. I don't have access to proper backing tracks. That was done with a very different process. But so yeah, I could work up a light show, or even I could technically just pull up any of my albums right now and play it without a light show.
So because of the organizational process that you've acquired and have worked on, basically you're able to pull up any of these albums that you've done since 2004. So as a fan and someone who they could be like in your show, they could be like, "Hey Randy, hey, I really like that one from this album. Could you play that one?" And you'll
See,
be like, "Yeah,
that would
sure,
actually be that would be
yeah,
a difficult thing to do. So technically, yes, but so if I'm playing, let's say I'm playing Incomprehensible Isolation, my 65th album, and someone says, "Hey, could you play Voices of the Soulless, which is off of my 55th album?" That would actually be a really difficult transition to make, just to go play that one song. And the reason for that is that I have to open the entire album in a new tab, basically in my recording program, and then I have to let everything load up,
okay."
right?
Well, what if they paid you for it?
I mean, it absolutely could be done. It would be an inefficient move. So if I wanted to, for example, if I wanted to play 20 songs off of 20 different albums, it would be a really hard show to pull off.
Oh yeah,
and that's why I typically just play an album straight through. I do one change, and when I change over, I'll have both albums loaded up in advance, so the changeover is pretty quick. So it would be a very inefficient process, but it certainly could happen. Yes.
I mean, technically speaking, you could pull up one song from an album.
I absolutely could.
Yeah.
And even if it were, I don't have lights programmed for this, I could just set my lights to be on and then just play the song. And I wouldn't have all the synchronized lights and stuff, but I'd still be visible and everything. And or I could just set all my lights to just kind of randomly change colors or whatever. So I mean, that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. I could pull up any random song. I should modify that slightly. I could pull up any random song except for my 49th album, because on that, all of the recorded instruments were lost about 2 years ago. So I don't have any rhythm guitars or any of that stuff recorded anymore. I would actually have to re-record that album in order to play it live. So that one is off the docket.
But it sounds like you've kept all these backing tracks and everything that you used originally for the albums. Yeah. So I can, for me, like, I can relate to this because I'm not talking about me improvising over one of my songs. I'm just talking about the music that I make in FL Studio, and then going and revisiting it, and so I can relate to that.
Yeah, it is. It's great to be. Sorry, keep going.
Oh yeah, sorry. Like finding the project file. You have to fucking put it in the right folder, or you're gonna be pissed later.
Oh, dude, this is another thing that I talk to my students about so much. Because I've had several students get into the process of recording, and I'm like, okay, make a folder on your desktop and call it recordings. And now going to that and make a folder in there and call it song 1, and then going to that folder and make a folder for your audio. And I say it's digital hygiene. If you don't have good digital hygiene, you are going to hurt yourself as a recording artist.
This little baby here is like my life. I'm ashamed to say it. But
yeah, and another thing is, and this is a good one for anyone who records or is getting into recording, if your project is only saved in one place, you don't have that project. You have to save your project in at least 2 places. So my projects, I back up to an external hard drive in the house. I back up to an external hard drive in the house, and I also back it up to the cloud.
Yeah.
So and good story here. When I was recording Incomprehensible Isolation, that album I actually spent about 2.5 years on. And it was because I was dissatisfied with the production I was doing. So I needed to learn more about production. But I had gotten on stream at one point. I had recorded almost the entire album. I'd recorded all the rhythm guitars, and I just had a couple of lead guitars left to record. So I was doing a stream, and I was like, hey, I'm just going to do recordings on stream today. So I opened this project up, and to this day, I don't know what happened. All of my guitar recordings were gone. Just gone. They disappeared. I have no idea what happened. The entire folder of recordings was just gone from my computer. And I saw this 2 minutes before I'm supposed to be streaming. And so I just started the stream and I said, hey, this is what happened. All of my guitar recordings for this album were gone. And, the comments were like, oh my God, that's terrible. And I said, it's not terrible because this is my 65th album. If this was my first album and I had lost all of my recordings, it would be devastating. But I've recorded 64 albums in the past. I've recorded 65 because this one was almost done. I know that I can just record these over. This is not a big deal to me at this point. But I wouldn't have lost my guitar recordings if I'd backed them up. Because what I would typically do is back up my project after I released it. I would record the whole thing and then throw it on my hard drive, right? And I was still in the process. So now I back up as I go. I learned my lesson there. And the other thing I'm going to say on this subject, because this is important, is save your project all the time. When I was doing my when I was doing my first album, I'm up at Riverside Studios in Granite Falls, Washington. Sorry, say again.
Sometimes your computer does it for you. Like nowadays, it's like it does it for you every 10 minutes at least on some dogs.
Here's my thing. I have turned off autosave in all of my audio programs. I have completely, I want my program to not do it. And the reason here is I want anything that goes wrong on any of my albums, I want to be able to blame myself for it. I don't even want to be able to blame my computer for it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Are you so like that process of saving it? You're responsible for that because it's part of your process. I see what you're saying.
Yes. When I did my first album, I was up at Riverside Studios and I was working overnight. I was the only one in the studio. And I'd been working on the song Mental Floss for about 4 hours. Power went out. I had not saved it once. I had 4 hours of work I just had to do over. Power comes back up and I start, and that has never happened again. It's okay to do it once. It's not okay to do it twice. You learn your lesson from that, hopefully. So now I know that we're on part 2 of this interview. I have pointed out that I'm kind of verbose about music. I realize we've just hit an hour. Do you want to keep going? Do you want to turn this into a part 3 later? Because I'm happy to meet with you again in a couple months or whatever, or next week or next year or whatever, or we can keep talking for another 3 hours. I'm good here.
Well, we should we should probably wrap it up soon because I actually have a date tonight.
Excellent.
So
I hope it goes well.
Thanks, man. And then we can definitely keep doing this. Maybe because I don't know if I've ever seen a part 3 and watched it. Like out of an interview. maybe
instead of making it a part 3, we could just be like the return of the Mad Poet, or doing the Mad Poet put out a new album. We're going to interview him about it because that's just never happened before. Or whatever we can. But no, I mean, you're a very easy person to talk to. So I certainly don't want to intrude too much on your time because you get me talking about music and it doesn't stop.
No worries. This has been really good. And I feel like we've come to a climax here. So
excellent.
Let's wrap it up. So we talked about at first, your process of kind of recording drums and guitar. So and you said that drums was the foundation, and then we kind of went into we talked about a lot of things, but another thing we did was talk about your process with what you're doing now. So how you started and kind of where you're at now.
Yeah.
With your process. And so is there anything else you want to tell people about what you're doing with guitar or with your students or anything that's new that you're working on now?
But yeah, and this won't take too long. So it's been, I think, about 2 months since I released my 66th album. That was titled Schizoid Paraphrenic. And I'm taking some time on my next album. So my next 2 albums are kind of important in the order of albums. So I'm working on my 67th album. I'm actually writing albums 67 through 70 currently. Album number 67 is important. It's got a song on it that's going to be a half hour long. And on every album I do, I dedicate a song to someone. people I like, someone I've worked with, some, lifelong friends, family. My daughter's had more songs dedicated to her than anyone else. So this next album is a slight change in that, where I'm actually writing a song that I consider a tribute. And this is a tribute to a former mentor of mine who passed a while back. And he was a guitar mentor, and a very important one, in my opinion. He's probably one of the more important guitar mentors that I've had in my life, just because of a few things he said years ago that really put me on a good path. And so I've been spending some extra time on that particular album. I could have easily been done with it by now, but I just feel like I want to, in this tribute to Ron, I really want to do justice to the importance he's had, the impact that he's had on me as a guitarist. And so I'm spending a lot of extra time on that. And that song is going to be pretty wild. It's got a lot of parts. It goes all over the place. It's kind of unfortunate that I'm, doing this tribute to him posthumously, because he would love what I'm doing these days. So I'm working on that. That's going to be really awesome. And then my 68th album, when you and I first started talking, was on Reddit, and you asked people about what the limitations were they place on themselves. And I said, every 17th album, I write only one song, and it's exactly 52 minutes, 25 seconds. So my 68th album will be the fourth installment in what I call the Asymmetric Writing Series, my fourth 17th album. So I've been working on that. And then my 69th album is going to be titled Pink. I'm going to do one performance of that. My initial performance of that, I'm going to do in drag. And there's going to be a song on that will have vocals on it. Now, it's going to be a spoken word type of a thing, but it's also possible I'm going to do a little bit of singing on that. And if I do the singing on that song, the first thing I sing about, this will just be to let people know how weird I am, it's going to be about oysters. And that's all I will say about that. So I do have some very cool, for people who are into long songs, I got some really cool long songs coming up. And singing could be a potential change in the near future. I've been working on my voice a lot. Well, I'm not going to make any promises, but there's some possibilities there.
Yeah, well, I remember we talked about that. Yeah, that's great, man.
Excellent.
So, all right, well, I will definitely hit you up again for that the Mad Poet Returns.
Let's do it. I'm looking forward to it. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Hope you have a great time on your date tonight. I hope everything goes well, and enjoy your life. We will see you soon. Thanks so much.
Right. Thanks again, Randy.
You bet. Bye.